Welcome, the Lord's chosen. The fastest way to misjudge a person is to believe you've already figured them out. They thought they knew what they were dealing with. They created a story, assigned a label, and quietly agreed among themselves to keep their distance. Not because you were loud, not because you were aggressive, but because you didn't fit neatly into the categories they rely on to feel safe. You didn't play predictable. You didn't perform for comfort. And in a world that survives on easy explanations, that alone is enough to set off alarms. Here's a fact people don't like to admit. Social groups are wired to distrust anyone who doesn't respond to pressure the right way. Studies on group behavior show that individuals who remain emotionally regulated under stress are often perceived as untrustworthy or suspicious, not because they're doing something wrong, but because they can't be read easily. Translation: calm, contained people get misinterpreted all the time. Apparently, if you're not panicking with everyone else, you must be plotting something. Very cinematic, very incorrect. So the narrative forms. You become that one, the one people watch a little longer, the one conversations lower around, the one who gets described with vague words that sound serious but explain nothing. And honestly, if you've ever noticed people acting like you're a complex puzzle they didn't sign up to solve, congratulations, you've been cast in a role you never auditioned for. But then something shifts. You meet someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't speculate, and doesn't try to decode you like a locked file. No exaggerated caution, no dramatic distance, just clarity. And suddenly, the tension everyone else manufactured evaporates, like realizing the haunted house is just bad lighting and a creaky floorboard. That moment is where the real story begins. Because when misunderstanding meets understanding, one of them doesn't survive. Number one, you weren't feared for who you are, but for what you disrupted. People rarely react to a person. They react to what that person does to the room. You didn't walk in trying to shake tables, yet something shifted the moment you arrived. The usual rhythms felt slightly off. The jokes landed differently. The power balance got quieter. And instead of asking why, people reached for the fastest explanation they had. You must be a problem. Not because you caused chaos, but because you didn't reinforce the order they were used to. Most environments survive on unspoken agreements. Everyone pretends not to notice certain things. Everyone accepts a few lies because challenging them feels exhausting. Then someone shows up who doesn't actively participate in the performance. You didn't announce rebellion. You simply didn't play along. That alone is enough to make people uneasy. When someone doesn't feed the system starts labeling the person. What you disrupted wasn't authority or tradition. It was comfort. You made it harder for people to hide behind habits. Your presence forced small, uncomfortable self-checks. Am I really confident or just loud? Am I in control or just obeyed? Those questions are annoying when they come from within, so people push them outward and attach them to you instead. That's where fear sneaks in. Not the dramatic kind, but the subtle kind that shows up as distance, caution, or strange assumptions. You became intense, hard to read, or different. None of those words are insults on their own, but together they form a warning sign for people who prefer things familiar, even when familiar is fake. Here's the uncomfortable truth. People protect patterns more fiercely than they protect honesty. And when you disrupt a pattern without trying, you're seen as unpredictable. Unpredictable people can't be managed easily. And anything that can't be managed gets treated like a risk. But the disruption was never destructive. It was revealing. You exposed how fragile the balance actually was. And instead of fixing the balance, people tried to move you out of the way, not because you were wrong, but because you reminded them that the structure they rely on isn't as solid as they pretend. Number 2, they misread your depth as threat because they only understand noise. Most people operate at the surface level. Loud voices, flashy gestures, constant movement. They think that's how presence is measured. They confuse volume with value and chaos with competence. When someone comes along who doesn't play that game, someone who doesn't need to shout to be noticed, it rattles them. Your calm, your control, your ability to think before acting, it looks suspicious to them because they have nothing in their toolkit to interpret it correctly. Depth is intimidating in ways people rarely admit. When you don't react the way they expect, when you pause instead of responding immediately, when you hold your own without needing validation, it forces them to ask questions they aren't ready to answer. They see your patience, your observation, your quiet assessment, and instead of recognizing skill or intelligence, they label it as dangerous. The mind fills in the blanks with worst-case scenarios because that's what it knows. And when someone can't be read like an open book, the default is fear. What they don't realize is that your depth isn't about hiding or planning harm. It's about awareness. You notice patterns, you anticipate moves, you calculate consequences. That's what makes you effective, not scary, but they can't separate strategy from threat. People who live in noise, constantly reacting and performing, see stillness as a weapon, silence as a trap. They assume that because they can't follow your rhythm is a challenge. The irony is brutal. They call you dangerous when the real danger is their inability to understand you. They misinterpret observation as scheming, composure as intimidation, and intelligence as manipulation. The world rewards the loud and punishes the quiet, so anyone who moves deliberately without making a fuss immediately gets flagged as an anomaly, and anomalies trigger unease. Your depth is a mirror they aren't ready to look into. You expose the limitations of their perspective, and for that, they assign labels to contain what they can't control. In reality, the threat isn't yours, it's theirs. And the sooner they recognize that, the sooner they stop fearing a person whose only crime is being fully aware. Number 3, their caution wasn't intuition, it was projection. Most of what people call intuition is just a reflection of themselves. They claim to sense danger, but what they're really sensing is their own insecurities, biases, and unresolved issues bouncing off someone who doesn't mirror their fears. When they labeled you as dangerous, it wasn't a revelation about you, it was a confession about them. Every wary glance, every whispered warning, every subtle hesitation was less about your actions and more about the stories they carry inside. Projection is tricky because it feels real. If someone is cautious around you, it seems like proof that you're intimidating. But what they're really doing is externalizing the parts of themselves they don't want to face. Their fear of being outsmarted, outmaneuvered, or overshadowed gets disguised as your threat. They can't acknowledge that they're uncomfortable simply because someone exists on a level they aren't used to. Instead, it's easier to label you as the problem, to imagine that your presence is dangerous than to confront the truth about their own limitations. This projection isn't always conscious. People act first, interpret later, and assign meaning where none exists. They assume motives, predict moves, and construct stories to make sense of feelings they don't understand. You aren't the danger. They just haven't processed what it's like to encounter someone who refuses to fit the box they've prepared. And in their minds, assigning blame externally is safer than questioning themselves. The effect is subtle but powerful. Suddenly, every gesture you make is overanalyzed, every pause is suspicious, every success is threatening. None of it comes from your actions, yet it lands as if it does. Their caution becomes a lens that distorts reality, a mirror reflecting their unease back onto you. The truth is brutal but liberating. You are not the product of their fear. You are simply the person they cannot contain within the framework of their own mind. The moment you realize their caution says nothing about you and everything about them, the dynamic changes entirely. You stop being a target of speculation and start existing on your own terms, free of the distorted lens they insist on holding up. Number 4, you didn't intimidate them with power, you intimidated them with self-containment. True presence doesn't need volume. It doesn't need flash, aggression, or constant validation. What unsettled people about you wasn't the size of your achievements or the force of your personality. It was the fact that you existed fully without seeking permission or approval. You carried yourself with a calm authority, a quiet confidence that made everything around you feel both alive and unpredictable. That level of self-containment is disarming because most people have spent their lives performing to be noticed, reacting to survive, and proving themselves constantly. When someone simply is, it throws them off balance. Self-containment is deceptively simple. It's not about shutting people out or hiding thoughts. It's about owning them without needing to display them. You could sit in a room and not say a word, yet people would feel your presence as acutely as if you'd shouted it across the street. That presence makes them nervous because they realize control isn't possible. They can't manipulate, provoke, or pressure you into reacting. You respond only when necessary and on your terms, which is terrifying for anyone accustomed to predictability. The intimidation isn't physical or even tactical, it's psychological. People fear what they cannot shape. They fear someone whose internal compass doesn't wobble under scrutiny, gossip, or expectation. You weren't pushing against them. You weren't overtly challenging them. You were simply contained, aware, and complete in yourself. And for people who survive by influencing the world around them, that kind of self-sufficiency feels like a threat because it exposes their dependency. Ironically, the more they feared you, the less they understood you. Your self-containment was a mirror showing them how uncontained their own lives were. They interpreted your calm as calculation, your observation as strategy, your patience as superiority. None of it was false. It was just presence. And that presence revealed a truth they weren't prepared to face. You didn't need them, you didn't need validation, and you weren't going anywhere. That realization, more than anything else, made you impossible to ignore. Number 5, the danger they sensed was loss of control, not harm. People rarely fear the person in front of them. They fear the fact that they can't control them. That's what made you feel dangerous in their eyes. It wasn't about your intentions, your words, or your actions. It was about the realization that their influence over you had limits. Most of the world operates on leverage, subtle pressures, manipulation, social expectation, or peer approval. When someone walks through life who isn't swayed by any of it, it exposes the illusion they've built to feel safe and important. That exposure is uncomfortable, so they reframe it as threat. Loss of control is far more unsettling than actual danger. People can plan for conflict, for aggression, for mistakes. They can react to chaos because chaos is predictable in its unpredictability. But when someone exists outside the systems designed to contain them, the rules no longer apply. They can't predict you, and predicting is how they maintain the illusion of stability. That's why your calm, your composure, and your refusal to bend immediately became misread as risk. They weren't analyzing you, they were analyzing themselves and the cracks your presence revealed. The irony is that you were rarely trying to disrupt anything. You weren't plotting, threatening, or scheming. You were simply being consistent, grounded, and aware of your own boundaries. Yet that consistency, that clarity, made them anxious because it reminded them of all the ways they relied on control they didn't truly have. They projected their unease onto you, labeling it as danger, when the real fear was existential, the fear of losing the neat little frameworks they use to feel capable and safe. That's the brutal truth of perception. Danger is often imagined, and it's always easiest to locate it outside ourselves. In reality, the only threat you posed was the mirror of their own vulnerability. Once they realized you couldn't be managed, the dynamics shifted. You became an unmovable constant in a world desperate for malleability, and that is a kind of power people mistake for menace. It isn't fear of you, it's fear of what they can't control. Number 6. Then you met someone who saw through the myth immediately. Up until that point, people had been operating on assumptions. They created a story around you, filling in gaps with fear, suspicion, or exaggerated caution. They believed they understood you, but they didn't. And then someone came along who didn't need explanations, who didn't measure you against their insecurities, and who didn't require performances to feel safe. The moment they encountered you, the myth evaporated. The labels, the warnings, the whispered "be careful" narratives, they all fell away because this person recognized what others couldn't. You weren't dangerous, you were just uncontainable. This recognition changes everything. There's a subtle but powerful difference between being feared and being understood. Fear creates distance, suspicion, and tension. Understanding creates alignment. Your presence no longer triggers projection or speculation because this person isn't looking for reasons to be threatened. They don't inflate your actions into danger because they see the intention beneath them. Suddenly, the energy around you shifts. Where others saw unpredictability, they saw clarity. Where others interpreted stillness as threat, they recognized it as mastery. And in that recognition, the game changes entirely. Meeting someone who sees through the myth isn't flattering. It's revealing. They hold up a mirror that doesn't distort. They make you realize how often the world misreads presence, intelligence, and calm as something dangerous when it's nothing more than self-possession. Their perception is precise, and it refuses to bend to gossip, fear, or misconception. In their presence, the stories people told about you collapse, leaving only the truth. You are not a threat. You are simply exactly who you are. And that truth is both liberating and disarming. You stop performing, stop explaining, stop hiding. The tension that existed to protect others' illusions dissolves because they no longer need protection from you. For the first time, your reality meets someone else's awareness perfectly. And in that alignment, everything that once felt heavy or distorted begins to make sense. The myth ends, and the real connection begins. Number 7, for the first time you weren't being assessed, you were being understood. There's a difference between being watched and being seen. Until now, most people treated you like a puzzle or a threat, constantly analyzing, measuring, and testing your reactions. Every word you said, every gesture you made was filtered through their insecurities and assumptions. Nothing existed simply as it was. It was always being interpreted, judged, or misread. And that weight, subtle as it might be, shapes the way you move through the world. It forces caution, self-editing, and the constant management of perception. But then you met someone who didn't play that game. Being understood is rare because it doesn't rely on control or projection. This person didn't dissect your words or scan for weaknesses. They didn't need to inflate your intensity into something threatening to feel competent or secure. They saw the whole picture without imposing their fears onto it. And the effect is immediate and profound. When someone truly understands you, you stop performing for survival. You stop justifying your existence to avoid misinterpretation. The energy of assessment is replaced by alignment, and suddenly everything that felt like tension before feels like space to breathe. It's disorienting at first because you've been trained to expect evaluation. The pause, the lack of questioning, the absence of hidden agendas. It feels unusual, almost suspicious. because your experience has always been one of caution and misreading. But then clarity sets in. This person doesn't need to control you because they recognize your boundaries, your patterns, and your essence. They don't fear what they don't understand. They understand what others fear to see. This understanding doesn't just change how they see you, it changes how you see yourself. You realize that the misinterpretations, the labels, and the caution from others were never a reflection of your nature, but of their inability to process it. In their presence, the distortions vanish, and you're left with the rare, liberating truth. You are fully visible, fully recognized, and fully understood. For the first time, the weight of perception doesn't press down on you, and that freedom becomes intoxicating. Number 8. Your edge stopped being a weapon and became a language. Until then, everything sharp about you, the way you observed, calculated, and moved through the world, had been interpreted as threat. Your intensity, your focus, your clarity, all of it was seen as something to be feared, avoided, or neutralized. People reacted as if your presence was a challenge, and their responses reinforced the idea that your edge was dangerous. But the moment you met someone who could understand you, everything changed. That same edge that once set alarms off in others became a means of communication, a language they could read without distortion or panic. It's not that the edge softened or disappeared. You didn't need to lower your standards, censor your thoughts, or dim your presence. Instead, someone else could perceive the signals you had always sent, the precision in your words, the intensity in your gaze, the rhythm in your decisions, and interpret them correctly. What had been misread as threat became a way to convey understanding, trust, and alignment. Your clarity became a dialogue rather than a challenge. This transformation is profound because it shifts the dynamic entirely. Being misunderstood forces you to hide parts of yourself, to protect your power from misinterpretation. But when someone speaks your language, you don't need protection anymore. The same patterns, the same intensity, the same sharpness suddenly connect instead of divide. Your edge no longer isolates you, it bridges gaps. The very traits that once created distance now create resonance. And that realization is liberating. You see that what people feared wasn't your nature. It was their inability to translate it. Once someone can interpret your language, you operate in a space where intention and perception are aligned. You no longer exist to trigger caution or to survive misunderstanding. You exist to communicate, to influence, to create impact without apology. The edge that was once a barrier now becomes your voice. It stops being a weapon aimed at the world and starts being a tool to interact with it on your terms. It's sharper, clearer, and more potent than ever. But now it speaks instead of threatening. Number 9. The threat narrative collapsed when fear found no echo. Fear only survives when it's reflected back. Until then, the story people told about you, how intense you were, how unpredictable, how dangerous, thrived because it met expectation. They saw their own anxieties mirrored in your actions and let that reflection define reality. Every misread glance, every whispered warning, every calculated assumption was fueled by their own fear. It became a narrative, a story repeated in quiet corners, inside conversations, and in the careful distance people maintained. That story was powerful because it had an audience willing to believe it, an echo chamber of anxiety that reinforced itself. Then someone entered who didn't participate in the echo. They didn't react the way others did. They didn't inflate your presence to meet their fears, and they didn't assign meaning to silence, calculation, or observation. Their perception didn't resonate with the story. It existed independently. And when fear finds no echo, it collapses. All the tension, all the warnings, all the assumptions lose their weight. What once seemed dangerous suddenly feels ordinary, like a storm passing over a field, leaving the ground unchanged. This collapse is subtle but seismic. It's not about proving anyone wrong or forcing validation. It's about the simple fact that their narrative no longer sticks. The signals they once misinterpreted, the edges they once feared, the intensity they once avoided, all of it becomes neutral, observed without distortion. Their internal story, which framed you as a threat, simply has nothing to feed on anymore. And in that space, clarity emerges. You stop existing as a reflection of their insecurities and start existing on your own terms. The dynamic that allowed fear to flourish, the assumptions, the projections, the exaggerated caution, vanishes. You are no longer the subject of a story created to contain you. You are simply a person whose presence is understood for what it is, and that understanding alone dissolves the illusions that once made you seem dangerous. The lesson is undeniable. Fear only holds power when it's echoed. Remove the echo, and it evaporates, leaving only truth. Number 10. You realized you were never meant to be isolated, just accurately met. For so long, the world framed you as a lone figure, someone who existed on the edges, someone whose intensity or awareness made connection dangerous or impossible. People assumed that because others feared or misread you, solitude was your fate. And for a time, you believed it. You carried the weight of distance as if it were proof of your difference, interpreting caution and suspicion as rejection. But isolation isn't about who you are, it's about how you're understood. The problem wasn't that you were too much for the world. The problem was that the world had never encountered someone willing and able to meet you fully and accurately. When that person appeared, it shifted everything. There was no guessing, no interpreting, no testing. They didn't try to change you, manipulate you, or fit you into a convenient story. They saw you as you were, and in that recognition, the need for protection dissolved. Suddenly, the isolation that had felt natural became unnecessary. The walls you'd built, the caution you'd maintained, the careful distance you enforced, all of it was no longer required because someone else could navigate your presence without fear or distortion. Being accurately met is a radical concept. It's not flattering in a superficial way. It doesn't stroke ego or praise achievement. It simply acknowledges reality, your complexity, your intensity, your depth. All of it is valid and acceptable without adjustment. That kind of recognition is rare, and when it occurs, it has the power to rewrite long-held beliefs about loneliness and separation. Isolation was never a verdict, it was a symptom of misunderstanding. The realization is liberating. You understand that connection isn't about lowering your edge or tempering your presence. It's about encountering someone capable of reading you clearly. You weren't alone because you were unapproachable or unrelatable. You were alone because the world had only met projections of itself when it looked at you. Once someone finally meets you accurately, the need for isolation disappears, and the space for genuine alignment, understanding, and presence opens wide. You see for the first time that being fully yourself does not require being fully alone. Number 11. Your match didn't soften you, they sharpened you. Most people respond to intensity by trying to dull it, either with criticism, distance, or subtle manipulation. They want to take the edge off, to make it easier to handle. That's why being matched by the right person is entirely different. Your match didn't seek to tame you or tone you down. They didn't flinch at your strength or recoil from your focus. Instead, they amplified it. They met you on the same wavelength, reflecting back your energy in ways that clarified it, refined it, and made it more precise. The effect is electric. Sharpening doesn't mean changing who you are. It doesn't mean diluting your intensity or abandoning your principles. It means alignment. When someone recognizes the full measure of your abilities, your awareness, and your perspective. They create a space where that edge can exist in full force without friction. They aren't threatened by it. They complement it. They challenge you, push you, and hold you accountable, but in a way that strengthens rather than diminishes. The result is a kind of evolution that no solitary struggle could achieve. This sharpening is also about perception. With your match, your clarity isn't misread as threat. Your precision isn't misinterpreted as arrogance. Your focus isn't mistaken for obsession. The energy that once caused tension and distance now becomes dialogue, collaboration, and understanding. Every trait that others feared becomes a tool for growth. Your edge stops being a burden to navigate and starts being a force that interacts with the world with even greater effectiveness. The beauty of this dynamic is subtle but profound. Your strength isn't softened to be acceptable. It's honed to be fully realized. Your match doesn't dilute reality. They illuminate it. They push you into spaces you couldn't enter alone, make your instincts sharper, your vision clearer, and your decisions more deliberate. In essence, they turn potential into precision, intensity into clarity, and raw power into purposeful action. With the right person, your edge ceases to be something to hide or justify. It becomes the instrument of who you were always meant to be. Number 12. The world suddenly made sense from a higher vantage point. There comes a moment when everything that felt chaotic, confusing, or unfair suddenly aligns into clarity. Meeting someone who truly understands you doesn't just shift how you're seen, it shifts how you see the world. Suddenly patterns become obvious, motivations become transparent, and the subtle dynamics that once felt overwhelming start to reveal themselves. You realize that most of the tension, the caution, and the fear you encountered wasn't about you at all. It was about how people interpreted what they couldn't process. That revelation alone rewires your perspective. From this higher vantage point, you start noticing things you missed before. You see the invisible rules that govern behavior, the subtle ways people manipulate narratives, and the quiet ways power flows in relationships and groups. It's not just observation, it's understanding. Where you once felt cornered or misread, you now perceive the layers behind every interaction. You recognize the difference between genuine intention and projection, between control and influence, and between alignment and pretense. It's as if someone has handed you a map of the unseen world, and for the first time, you know how to navigate it with confidence. What's extraordinary is how this clarity transforms your own behavior. You stop reacting to the distortions of others and start operating from truth. Decisions become sharper, actions more deliberate, and your energy more focused. The world no longer feels like a maze designed to trap you. It becomes a landscape you can move through intentionally. You recognize patterns without being consumed by them, and you engage without being manipulated. And the most profound part is the internal shift, the stress of misunderstanding, the weight of misjudgment, the constant energy spent managing perceptions. All of it diminishes. You see people, situations, and outcomes clearly, and in that clarity, you gain freedom. Life stops feeling like a series of battles you weren't equipped for, and starts feeling like a system you can understand, interpret, and move through strategically. From that higher vantage point, confusion fades, fear loses power, and the world becomes a place where insight and presence matter far more than noise and illusion. Number 13. What once made you dangerous became the standard for discernment. The traits that once set alarms off in others, the clarity of your mind, the precision of your actions, the calm intensity you carried, were never a threat in themselves. They only seemed dangerous because most people hadn't learned to recognize them as markers of awareness and insight. What they feared was not you, but the lens you held up to the world, one that reflected truth they weren't ready to see. Over time, however, exposure to someone who could match your perception transforms that perception itself. The behaviors once misinterpreted become the benchmark, the measure against which all others are quietly assessed. Discernment is rare because it requires both perception and understanding. Most people mistake boldness for knowledge, noise for insight, or aggression for influence. But your presence demanded attention in a different way. You didn't need to perform. Your awareness was evident in everything you did. When someone finally sees that clearly, without distortion, without fear, the qualities that were once alarming suddenly make perfect sense. What was labeled dangerous becomes logical, precise, and even essential. It's the shift from misunderstanding to recognition, from caution to clarity. This redefinition doesn't just affect how others see you, it changes your own perspective. The same traits that were once a source of tension now feel validated. You understand that the world isn't inherently hostile. It's unpracticed at identifying true capability. The edge that was once feared becomes your standard. Your judgment, your observation, your ability to operate calmly amid chaos are no longer anomalies. They are models of discernment that others unconsciously compare themselves against. And with that realization comes confidence and freedom. You no longer need to justify your nature or temper your actions to fit expectations. What was once a point of misinterpretation is now your signature. The world adjusts its assumptions, and in doing so, you step into a space where clarity is not optional, where awareness is respected, and where what was once feared becomes a quiet standard for excellence that others unconsciously aspire to match. Number 14, the real shift wasn't meeting your match. It was recognizing yourself clearly for the first time. All the tension, all the fear, all the misinterpretations weren't just about others. They were a reflection of your own journey towards self-awareness. For years, you moved through the world responding to how people labeled you, fearing their assumptions, and adjusting yourself to fit narratives you never agreed with. Meeting someone who truly understood you changed the dynamic externally, but the real transformation happened internally. You began to see yourself as you really are, without distortion, without compromise, and without the constant need to justify your presence. Recognition of self is unlike anything else. It doesn't come from praise or validation, and it isn't about achieving approval. It's about seeing your own patterns, understanding your own depth, and embracing the full measure of your capabilities. That moment of clarity is radical because it rewires everything: how you interact, how you perceive challenges, how you respond to tension. You no longer measure yourself against other people's expectations or fear their projections. You operate from your own internal standard, and that standard is unshakable because it's built on truth, not perception. This recognition also reframes all prior experiences. The people who misread you, the warnings, the distance, the caution, they weren't signs that you were flawed or threatening. They were indicators that the world hadn't yet learned how to meet you accurately. And once you see yourself clearly, those experiences stop weighing on you. They become context, lessons in understanding how perception works, and proof of the resilience you've cultivated along the way. The freedom that comes from self-recognition is absolute. You no longer exist in the space of others' fears or assumptions. You no longer need to perform, explain, or moderate yourself to make the world comfortable. You operate from clarity, from presence, and from authority over your own life. Meeting your match was powerful, but realizing your own truth is transformative. In that realization, all external judgments lose power, and you move forward fully grounded in who you are, unshakable, and finally aligned with the person you were always meant to be. Conclusion. What begins as a story of fear, caution, and misinterpretation transforms into a journey of clarity, alignment, and self-recognition. You were never dangerous in the way people assumed. You were simply uncontainable, precise, and fully yourself in a world that fears what it cannot easily categorize. Every glance of suspicion, every whispered warning, every pause of tension wasn't about who you were. It was about how people projected their limitations onto you. And yet, in the midst of misunderstanding, you encountered someone who could see through the myth, who matched your presence without fear, and in doing so revealed the most profound truth. The real shift always begins within. Through understanding, your edge became a language, your calm a signal of mastery, and your presence a standard others unconsciously measure themselves against. Fear loses its echo when someone meets you with clarity, and isolation dissolves when alignment replaces misreading. The world that once felt unpredictable and hostile suddenly becomes a landscape you can navigate with insight and authority. But the ultimate revelation isn't about external recognition. It's about recognizing yourself fully, understanding your depth, embracing your clarity, and stepping into the power of being exactly who you are without compromise. This journey transforms perception, interaction, and existence itself. What others once labeled as dangerous now becomes the measure of discernment, the blueprint of awareness, and the path to self-possession. You no longer operate from fear or assumption. You operate from truth. And in that alignment, the world begins to make sense, connections deepen, and every step forward carries the weight of intentionality, understanding, and authority. If this perspective resonated with you, make sure to join the community by subscribing to the channel. Like, comment, and share your thoughts so we can continue exploring these truths together. Every interaction helps build a space where clarity, awareness, and self-recognition thrive, and your engagement makes that possible. Don't just watch, be part of the journey. Stay blessed always.